Let me. Okay. So welcome to today's webinar. And we are Microverse, and Microverse is a program that we help people to become a remote software developer, and we will collect students together and through pair programming and to build freelance work and open source project. And we have host Lunch Learn to invite talent people in the industry to share their experience with us. And today we are very honored to invite, I think, Juha Lindstedt, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. He's a web architect and a partner at iDiD Digital Signage. And during this today's Lunch and Learn, he will share his story from starting as a fresh developer to become a web architecture. He will also talk about his experience in the open source world. And let's welcome him. You can start. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah. So I started Flash developing in the year 1999, and in the first years I did a lot like animations and interactive campaigns and stuff like that. And after Flash kind of died, nowadays I do mainly web systems. And the transition from Flash developer to JavaScript developer have been quite easy because JavaScript is actually really close to ActionScript, which is what Flash used. And the web as a platform has transformed a lot since Flash days, because it used to be a lot more interactive and a lot more creative, I think. And it's a bit shame, actually. But well, I hope it will change, because nowadays we have stuff like WebG and all kinds of powerful technologies. And also the devices are really powerful nowadays. So also the mobile devices. But yeah, Oh, and about the open source. So one of the biggest projects have been Redom, which is like a Vue library. It's really, really tiny. I can add link here actually. Yeah, and also the deck of cards, which is like a playing cards engine. Those have been quite popular. And as my current job, I work as web architect in iDiD Digital Signage. We are creating a digital signage system to control like screens. Basically, you can add videos, images, text, HTML, stuff like that. And it's been really interesting because it's so diverse to develop web systems and also the devices. So there's all kind of, for example, touchscreen devices and things like that. So yeah, it's really, really interesting as a day job. And I can also leverage my knowledge about animations, because we have quite nice transitions and things like that. But yeah, that's pretty much for the introduction. So how do we proceed? Do you have questions or? Is Max there still?
Does anyone have question? I think I can unmute people.
Yeah. So yeah, how do we proceed?
Right now, I think people don't have a question right now.
But yeah, so basically what I do is that I'm a full stack JavaScript developer. So I use JavaScript both in server side and client side as well. And in client side, I actually do mainly pure JavaScript. So I actually don't use React or Angular or Vue or things like that, mainly because we run so much low performance machines, for example, in iDiD. So using just tailor-made JavaScript is so much more powerful, and we can control the DOM so much better. But I still use reDOM, but it's actually really light layer between developer and the DOM. And in server side, I use Node.js and MongoDB. Both have been really great. Easy to start with and really powerful. And using JavaScript makes it possible to create microservices, which are really performant and really lightweight also. And I've used Node.js since 2011. But yeah, just ask any questions if you have related to JavaScript, for example, or working in the field. And yeah, I live here in Finland, actually, in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, next to Sweden.
So let me ask a question.
Yep.
So in Microverse, our course is we focus on the server side. We use Ruby on Rails. And
Okay.
what's your opinion about Ruby on Rails and compared to Node.js?
Well, I never used Ruby and don't know much about it. I've heard about it and I've seen some code written in Ruby, but never used it and can't read Ruby code. So before Node.js, I used PHP, but well, I can only talk about benefits of Node.js because yeah, the biggest benefit is that you can use the same language in the client side and server side as well, which is JavaScript. And for example, performance is really great nowadays. And there are so many powerful libraries written for Node.js. And everything is in GitHub and NPM, so it's really easy to find good libraries for it and modules. But yeah, I don't know about Ruby. Looks clean language, so probably good.
Yeah, because I was a Ruby on Rails developer before, and then I saw the trend is that Node.js is getting much more and more popular. So so after 2 years ago, I switched my language to Node.js.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've heard that many Node.js libraries have leveraged from Ruby. Actually, for example, Express.js is from Ruby. Actually, I think the style how you write Express.js applications. Don't know, but just remember reading it from somewhere.
Mm. Can you share about your experience in the open source world? So when did you start get involved in the open source? Because I think many people just using that library and build their project, and some people they don't have the willing to contribute to open source and how to contribute.
Yeah. There's many ways to contribute, because just opening an issue and commenting on issues is a good way to contribute. So I think that's underrated. No, underrated, because anything you do will help the projects. But how do I start it? I started by contributing to Riot.js, actually. Let me see. I think it's here. I think it's that. Yeah. I wrote like DOM reordering script for that because it lacked one. And as I wrote it, I noticed that it was quite slow, and then we enhanced it with a couple of guys from the Riot team. And then we realized that actually the script itself was fast, but the Riot was back then quite slow. So that inspired me to create my own UV library, which was called FRZR at the time. And it evolved to Redom later. And well, it actually, the Redom wasn't my first open source project. Basically, Deck of Cards was one of the first ones. And that was actually a project I initially did back in 2006 in Flash. And I just basically rewrote it in JavaScript. But yeah. Basically, starting with open source is quite easy. Just make a repository and push it to GitHub. And for example, with GitHub provides many useful tools. For example, GitHub Desktop, which is really easy to use. So yeah, I encourage anyone to just create a project to GitHub, and it can be anything like Hello World or anything like that, and just learn to use GitHub, because it's really important also in workplaces. I mean, we use GitHub as a collaboration tool in iDiD digital signage, and almost every major companies use Git or GitHub as a tool for developing, because it allows people to work separately from each other to the same project, and then later on just create pull requests and merge their code. So it's really useful to learn Git and GitHub. And about open source, the great thing about it is that even though you give up your work, but you get many good advices and people reviewing your code and testing and reporting bugs and fixing bugs. So I think it gives more than you need to give.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, so a lot of people join our program. We are a junior developer, just a junior developer. What's the mindset or some knowledge we must to have in order to become a like senior or become a architecture like you, a web architecture?
I think the biggest problem nowadays is that frameworks are so overrated, and
Yes.
I'm not saying it's a bad practice to use React or Vue. They are great tools, but they're not the best tools for learning, I think, because JavaScript itself in pure form and the DOM methods are really well documented in, for example, Mozilla developer documents, MDN. And by learning those, you'll become a better web programmer, I think, because and web browsers are really compatible nowadays, and there's no need for jQuery and stuff like that because everything is standardized, and even Microsoft's browsers are really compatible nowadays. So just learning the web standards is a good practice. And even though you're using frameworks like React and stuff like that, but you can still leverage the knowledge you have with just plain JavaScript knowledge. Because, for example, if you create some custom components, you cannot always use, for example, virtual DOM. Sometimes you need to access the DOM. So yeah, I'd recommend to learn the web standards themselves and for example, how the web works, how servers work and stuff like that. So that will definitely make you a better programmer. And for example, many people think that it will take a lot of time to learn web standards, but actually they are much more simpler than, for example, React or Vue. And people don't realize how much they use their time to learn about frameworks. So I'd encourage to learn the web standards, and they are actually a lot easier than people think.
The web standard is you have any website you can reference to?
Yeah, just Mozilla's developer documents. I can share the links here.
Thanks.
Basically, yeah, everything there.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually that goes with everything you read from the web because, for example, functional programming is really popular today. It's not a bad practice, but it's not the holy grail. So if you don't need to use functional every time. You can use for loops and stuff like that. They are not gone. So, and actually they're much more performant as well. And yeah, you read so many things about these new things, and everyone should use immutability and stuff like that, but you really don't have to. So just learn the basics and be creative and trust your instincts, basically. So everyone writes about that. This is the framework that everyone should use, but that's not the case.
Sava has a question. He said, what technology stack would you recommend for people who want to get into the web development industry today?
Good question. Yeah, that depends. If you're doing some hobby project, then I'd really recommend to learn web standards and try to leverage those. But of course, if you're doing some professional work, then that depends. For example, if you're in a company that uses React, then just use React. But I wouldn't say that there's any particular stack you should use. But for beginners, Node.js is good, Express.js, MongoDB. And in front end, I'd still recommend to start with just plain JavaScript and then adding libraries and frameworks if needed. So, and for example, you don't even need JavaScript for every project. You can just start with HTML and create forms and server-side rendering and stuff like that. So in many cases, that would be the best case to use just server-side rendering, actually, because then you get search engine optimizations and all those for free, basically. Because every time you add complexity to the project gets more complicated. So if you add, for example, React and Virtual DOM, you need to figure out how to do search engine optimization, and then client machines need to do a lot more work and stuff like that. So everything depends on the project, and my practice is that I always start from the most minimum approach, and then I add layers to that if needed. Yeah, so good question, but really complicated to answer. Oh, and one good book about JavaScript basics is eloquentjavascript.net. I shared the link. That's about plain JavaScript, and yeah, there's good basics there and good tips. And that's actually Eloquent JavaScript is one of the inspirations for my read-on Juve library. So there's a lot of good things there, and that's a good way to start creating JavaScript. Chrome is working in Virtual DOM native in the browser. Yeah, that's a good thing. Virtual DOM is great, but it's not the tool for every problem, because with Virtual DOM, it's you don't get the full power with Virtual DOM. I mean, you give up with so much if you use Virtual DOM. It's really easy to grasp it because it resembles so much with server-side rendering. And what I mean about that is that you have a page, and if you change the page, you just basically get the full HTML from the server. And Virtual DOM works quite like the same way, but it diffs the changes. And in some projects that work really well, but for example, if you want to use animations, transitions, stuff like that, things can get a bit complicated. And for example, some custom events and things like that. So yeah, there's good things about Virtual DOM, and then there's bad parts, good parts and bad parts. But another awkward thing about Virtual DOM is that you need to identify every element you don't want to be mutated by accident. For example, if you add element before another one, you should identify those so that the Virtual DOM doesn't update this element as this element changed and stuff like that. So Virtual DOM makes some things easier and some things harder. Yeah. Can you tell us more about what your job as a web architect looks like? Well, basically, what I think about web architect is that I think about the big picture. So if there's some new ideas for to do in our system, for example, then I think about how it should be done and the big picture. So everything from the back end to the front end. So basically like a full stack developer. But as a web architect, I also learn all about the new technologies and constantly update my knowledge about what's possible and what's not, and what's good and what's not. All about new web standards. And yeah, the whole stack from the backend to front end is tailor-made. So that makes usually new features easy to make, and we don't have that much limitations, but it's a lot of work to figure out the whole stack from the backend to the front end. But yeah, basically the whole knowledge about backend and front end and how they work together. And a lot of planning and discussions about user interface and user experience, and yeah, the big picture. That's how I'd say about it. Yeah, someone shared a link about the You Don't Know JS book series. It's also good books to read. And there's lots of good things about that. But another thing is that there's a lot of new APIs, for example, in ES6. There's async await, there's promises, there's all kind of that. But I'd recommend to start with ES5. So learn to be good with just the minimum tools. I mean, because in every higher level thing, you get more issues as well. But yeah, there are good things about them and there are bad things about them. So don't be afraid to use old technologies as well, because they are really useful still. And there's no such thing that as old technologies in web standards. For example, what I mean about this is that for loops are good as well still, and things like XML HTTP request is fine to use. You don't need to use fetch, and you can't even always use fetch. For example, file uploads are pretty much impossible right now, I think. And also streaming is not possible with fetch yet, and buffering, for example. There are some cases where you still need to use the old technologies. And I'm quoting the old technologies, no. Because, yeah, there's no such thing. Can you describe how much the process of developing on the web has changed over the years? Yeah, it has changed a lot. And frameworks and libraries have come and go. For example, first everyone used jQuery, Sugar.js, underscore, things like that. Then there were Knockout.js, Reactive.js. Then came Angular, Vue, React, and there's many libraries in between. It has changed to the better, but some development haven't been towards easier. I think there are some unnecessary complexities added. For example, immutability is not actually required, in my opinion, but in some projects that work. But and for example, the whole build process is a lot different, because in the old days you just wrote a JavaScript file by yourself and there wasn't any pre-processing going on. And nowadays there's so many things you need to learn about Webpack and Babel and Bubble and Rollup and whatever. So, and that's even not required. If you just create a JavaScript file and write your stuff there, that's fine. You don't need to use all these. But like I said before, start with the minimum approach and then add complexities after. How do you divide your time on open source project and your daily work? Well, nowadays, well, basically Redom is our work project because we use it in our system. So if I need any feature or some performance addition or stuff like that, optimization, whatever, it's related to work. Nowadays, I have 2 children, so basically they take so much my time and family altogether. So I don't do as much open source projects nowadays. I am a maintainer in, for example, Stylus, CSS pre-processing tool, but basically there I just browse through issues and try to answer questions because I don't have knowledge about the code itself. But that's one project we've been used so much in our system. So I thought it would be good to participate and contribute to it. And yeah. So yeah, I try to focus on my day job and Readom is part of my day job and yeah. What are your favorite open source projects other than Readom? Well, I enjoy seeing every new Vue libraries and read the code and code styles and well, of course, also every open source project we use, for example, Express.js, Stylus, nib, pug, MongoDB, Node.js, and also Linux. It's great server operating system, also open source. And even though I don't use React myself, I still like to learn about things from there as well, because there are good parts in that as well. Functional program is getting much popular nowadays. What's your opinion? Yeah, well, I talked a little about this before, but it's really good practice to write functions that take some input and give some output, and there's no side effects. But there are cases you need to do mutations, and it's not always a bad thing to do mutations. And I even use classes a lot, even though people say that that's a bad practice. But I really think that's actually a good thing for many cases. But if it's easy to use functional way so that you have only input and output and you don't do any side effects, then just go for it. But if there's a case that it adds complexity, why use it? So there are many different patterns and many different styles, and they all have their own use cases. And same goes with libraries and frameworks. So try to be open-minded with all kinds of blog posts people write and things about that everyone should use functional way or everyone should use immutability or stuff like that. That's my opinion about the subject.
Okay. Does anyone have any question? Think. Okay. So, thank you for joining our. Thank you for joining our Microverse Lunch and Learn. We're thankful for. Thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge and answering questions for us. And you recommend a lot of website and books for us to learn. And thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for arranging this.
Thank you. And I think today's webinar is end here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.